Now that it's been over a month of DOGE examining USAID records, I felt it was time to take a deeper look at what is really going on. First, I'd like to cover the objections to an audit of USAID records, so we can look at these objections and then decide if they are valid or not. Arguments against auditing USAID records have focused on national security, diplomatic relations, and operational efficiency, as far as diplomacy and decreasing operational efficiency. The proof is in the pudding. Our diplomacy policy has been to pay for others with our tax money, and many of us don't agree to it. And as far as compromising operational efficiency, are they kidding us? Our government has been run with absolutely no concern for efficiency by a group of people who care less about us than the mob. That is an absolutely ludicrous argument. Opponents also claim that increased scrutiny could compromise sensitive programs, endanger personnel in conflict zones, and reveal classified funding strategies. Personally, I think funding strategies that approved the many wasteful money pits that our taxes have been wasted on must be examined with a fine-tooth comb, and those strategies need completely revamped. They also argue that USAID already undergoes internal and external reviews, including oversight by the Office of Inspector General (OIG) and Congress. Some assert that additional audits would be redundant, costly, and could slow down emergency aid delivery. Costly? I'd say the $2 trillion in waste that is expected has been pretty costly. Apparently, based on the programs that are being revealed, all of the internal and external audits were insufficient to stop the abuse of the system. So that is a moot point. The audits that were conducted in the past were a lie or non-existent, and the buck stopped with the inspector generals, so they were replaced for non-performance. And for all of those that think they are being good people with this aid, there is so much need in the world that we don't need corporations to funnel our money. When you donate your change at a store, they are creating tax write-offs with their customers' money. Technically, you donated the money and it's your write-off. It adds up big time for those stores, and that's why they do it. People need to wake up and see how poverty and despair is being used to manipulate us out of something. Money, freedom, you name it. Other DOGE opponents contend that questioning USAID's financial management undermines its credibility and could be used to justify reducing foreign aid, which they argue is a key tool for U.S. influence and stability abroad. The only person I saw use USAID for influence abroad was Joe Biden when he threatened to withhold $1 billion of USAID funding to Ukraine in order to protect Hunter from being prosecuted. There is no credibility to undermine. They have none left. The opposition burdened an already bankrupt country by supporting millions of illegals who put our safety at risk and diluted American culture. They stole trillions from us, lining their own pockets, and they jailed us for exercising our right to free speech. None of the arguments hold water against DOGE, and personally, I think bringing DOGE or Musk into court over this is just going to open up a public forum for disclosure of every bit of their corruption. Nobody said anything when our personal information was being stolen because Social Security was hacked. And they have the nerve to say that Trump and DOGE are putting our information at risk. Come on. These are the best of the best when it comes to computer security, so they are simply impugning the government employees who are doing the audit. Think, guys, don't be a parrot. Their lies are clearly being exposed, and people who parrot their lies only look foolish and are bringing unwise attention to themselves. This is not targeting anyone, but when you go on public airwaves calling for the assassination of the commander-in-chief, you are committing treason, and people are going to report you. And according to the laws of a civil society, you will be punished just like anyone else. To date, DOGE has eliminated $105 billion in waste, according to the doge.gov website. The first question the Americans are going to ask, of course, is how does that affect me? According to the U.S. debt clock, each U.S. citizen owes $107,361, and each taxpayer owes $323,047. This means that taxpayers are paying 3 times their share. When we remove minors from the equation, that leaves 2/3 or 261 million American citizens who aren't paying taxes, and the 1/3 owes their own share but that of the others as well, because it is a collective debt. This is not an option under today's monetary system. If you are a taxpayer, you are in debt to multiple lenders, including the Federal Reserve, insurance companies, banks, domestic governments, and even government trust funds, including the Social Security Trust Fund. Yes, that's right, whether you are collecting Social Security benefits or not, you owe Social Security for money that you borrowed from them. Are you getting the irony of this all? The power that we have given people over our lives? It gets even crazier, guys. So why do we owe all this money? The official narrative is that in 2024, we paid about $1.1 trillion in interest alone. The U.S. debt as of 2024 is around $37 trillion, so that sounds pretty reasonable, doesn't it? When you ask the right question, you will learn that the portion of the national debt that is accumulated interest is estimated to be around $12 trillion to $14 trillion. That's around 1/3 of our national debt is interest that is accumulating at a rate of about $1 trillion or more every year. I watched a bit of the congressional DOGE hearings this morning and jotted down some figures, and I wanted to look at some of the insanity of this all. There is no justification, and I suspect we will see the woke narrative as a confirmation of the waste and a call to clean it up. But they offer no constructive solution and try to twist minds by making a debate out of every single grant or funding cut that DOGE is making. As always, don't forget to share this video to help others, like it for the algorithms, and subscribe to my channel, ring the bell, and connect to our community posts. We are a group of people trying to help others transition gracefully through this period of disturbing disclosure. If you are also inclined to help support the channel, there is a super thanks tip under the 3 dots below the channel. These tips go 100% back into the channel and are greatly appreciated. Chapter 3: The Fight Against Terrorism. Ever since September 11, 2001, we have lived in fear of terrorism. I find it very peculiar that it happened with one event overnight. That one event created a war on terror, hundreds of more shell companies to funnel money through. Ironically, we were also giving the money to the terrorists to create the terror. According to the congressional hearings, we have been giving the Taliban about $40 million a week. We have also sent $2.1 billion to Hamas since September, representing the 90% of aid that we sent to Gaza that went into Hamas-controlled areas. Why are we even in these areas, guys? It's insane. Chapter 4: Humanitarian Funding. The Democrats don't want you to focus on that, though. Instead, Democratic Representative Kassar made his 5 minutes all about the millions of children who are dying from severe acute malnutrition in Ethiopia and Sudan because Musk cut off their funding. He made a big deal about how warehouses of food are sitting there and can't be delivered. That in itself seemed fishy to me, because if people are starving, they can get a mule and cart to transport it if they need to. So I decided to look up these figures, and it's just more fear-driven drama, guys. Severe acute malnutrition is primarily in children under 5 and is very different from chronic malnutrition. In the past 10 years, 72,000 children have died from acute malnutrition in Sudan and 59,000 in Ethiopia. Now compare that to the 2.5 million Americans who have died from preventable medical errors in the last 10 years. The problem is not as severe as they want us to think, and I have to ask why there have even been 131,000 deaths if we have been sending this money for the last 10 years. After Representative Kassar's oration, committee chairperson Marjorie Taylor Greene fact-checked his heartfelt plea and announced that money going to Ethiopia and Sudan has been released. She did not say if all of it was released or to who. It seems that it would be wise to cut the fat, reactivate the agreements that are not fraudulent, and prosecute those involved with the ones that are. What is the big deal? This is not the crisis that Trump and Musk opponents want you to think it is. This is a financial audit. Nobody is dying from the funding that is being cut, and all of these cutbacks are going to pay back the debt that the U.S. government spent on your behalf. Chapter 5. Military Aid. We also spend $20 to $30 billion per year on military aid to foreign countries, such as Israel, Ukraine, and others. Humanitarian aid, including disaster relief, food assistance, and development aid, typically totals around $30 billion to $50 billion annually, so that's a total of $50 to $80 billion a year to foreign aid. Every year, we spend tens of billions of dollars on wars around the world. In 2022 alone, we committed $45 billion. Suffice to say, we go into debt when we get involved with wars in other countries. Every taxpayer goes into debt when we spend this money. Yesterday, General Flynn posted on X that Ukraine funding is one giant money laundering operation, and Elon Musk said, "He's not wrong." So that you understand, Ukraine is only one of potentially thousands of money laundering operations that are receiving U.S. taxpayer dollars. The official talking point regarding the national debt is that most of our debt is due to entitlement programs. I want you to understand how skewed our information is. I went into ChatGPT and asked it how much of the debt is entitlements. The response that came back was that $23 trillion of our debt was due to entitlement programs, including $9 trillion to Social Security based on projected future benefits, $9 trillion to Medicare, and $5 trillion to Medicaid. That seemed incredibly high. 23 out of the 37 trillion? Chapter 6. Entitlements. My next clarification to the AI was that I don't want future projections. I'd like to know how much was spent in 2024, and the response was quite different. The accurate answer for 2024 spending, as per your request, is Social Security, approximately $1.2 trillion, Medicare, about $940 billion, and Medicaid, around $700 billion. For a total paid in entitlements in 2024 was $2.84 trillion, not $23 trillion. The figures have been inflated tenfold. What I get from this is not only validation that the media on the internet is skewed toward a panic narrative and that AI applications such as ChatGPT are programmed to produce responses based on these narratives. It also tells us how far the deep state planned on bilking Americans with this data, raising the budget each year in Congress. One thing that we know now is that even at the more reasonable costs for entitlements than their projections, there still is a lot of fraud and waste in these programs that they are trying to spin. But I've always said to follow the buck, and that's exactly what is happening now. Chapter 7. Propaganda. USAID spent over $100 million to spread propaganda with taxpayer money. Your money paid numerous media outlets to spread a deep state narrative. We've always known this was happening, but DOGE has the receipts that $3 million went to the BBC, $9 million went to Reuters news outlet, $20 million went to the Associated Press, $34 million went to Politico, and $50 million went to the New York Times, where you must pay to see the content that you funded. Chapter 8. Leftist Lobbyists. Another area that you are spending money on as a taxpayer is lobbyists employed by companies such as USAID and others. So USAID was paying lobbyists to convince Washington to spend money on the programs in the next chapter. I found a report that Rand Paul submitted to Congress in 2023 called the Festivus Report, where he itemizes numerous wastes that he advised Congress about. I'll link the Festivus report in the description. Why was nothing done before now as a result of such a disturbing report about government waste? Chapter 9. USAID. You have already heard about the money for trans operas and propaganda supporting men who like other men and trans women, so we won't revisit the insanity because there's lots more. So here is an update on more money flowing into the USAID pot from the American people. $7.9 million to teach Sri Lankan journalists how to avoid binary gendered language. Over $4.5 million to combat disinformation in Kazakhstan. $1.5 million for art for inclusion of people with disabilities. $2 million for sex changes and LGBT activism in Guatemala. $6 million to transform digital spaces to reflect feminist democratic principles. $2.1 million to help the BBC value the diversity of Libyan society. $10 million worth of USAID-funded meals, which went to an Al-Qaeda-linked terrorist group. We were feeding Al-Qaeda. $25 million for Deloitte to promote green transportation in the country of Georgia. They have better transportation than we do in Georgia? How horribly polluting can their transportation be? $6 million to promote tourism in Egypt. $2.5 million to promote inclusion in Vietnam. $16.8 million for a separate inclusion group in Vietnam. I have no idea who we are trying to include in Vietnam, do you? $5 million to EcoHealth Alliance, one of the key NGOs funding bat virus research at the Wuhan lab. $20 million for a group related to a key player in the Russiagate impeachment hoax. Now we know who paid for Russiagate. We did. $1.1 million to an Armenian LGBT group. $1.2 million to help the African Methodist Episcopal Church Service and Development Agency in Washington, D.C. build a state-of-the-art 440-seat auditorium. $1.3 million to Arab and Jewish photographers. Are you believing this? Are we paying for photographers to document the war in Gaza? $1.5 million to promote LGBT advocacy in Jamaica? $1.5 million to rebuild the Cuban media ecosystem? Cuban media? What the heck? $2 million to promote LGBT equality through entrepreneurship in Latin America. $500,000 to solve sectarian violence in Israel. The money went out just 10 days before the Hamas October 7th attack. $2.3 million for artisanal and small-scale gold mining in the Amazon. $3.9 million for LGBT causes in the Western Balkans. $5.5 million for LGBT activism in Uganda. $6 million for advancing LGBT issues in priority countries around the world. It would be nice to know these priority countries, or was this at someone's discretion? $8.3 million for USAID education, equity, and inclusion. USAID's climate strategy outlined a $150 billion whole-of-agency approach to building an equitable world with net-zero greenhouse gas emissions. So when people are talking about USAID and other cuts, you must know what is really going on. Musk has a goal of $2 trillion in waste and fraud identification and elimination by next year. He apparently has clear goals, and he has a team capable of finding the deliberately placed needles in the proverbial haystack. Fraud is tough to investigate and to prove because the bad guys know they are doing bad and have taken very deliberate measures to hide the evidence. It's my understanding that this audit is being done by algorithmic searches, which is great for throwing out a broadcast for further review. It also requires following all of their contacts and communications, all transactions, asset trends, and many other parameters that can lead to deeper organizations and evidence of a crime. So while the deep state puppets are trying to distract you with all of the people across the world who are suffering, I say don't take your eyes off the numbers for 1 second. I'm thinking that the fraud was so great that we are going to have more than enough humanitarian and entitlement funds to take care of those who will benefit by it. while you are listening about these starving people in Africa. Ask how much of the money actually was spent on benefits that reached them. You will find that it's a very small part. The beneficiaries of these funds are getting much more of the money than the starving people. Chapter 10. Summary. I hope that gives you guys a little better idea of what is going on in the pits of Washington behind the doors of Congress. I hope you can begin to identify the lies versus the truth, and I hope you understand that there are many issues that the Trump administration must try to identify and reverse the damage to our system. As cogent people, we must realize that it's wise to consider each program separately. Identifying waste and fraud with our money is an amazing thing to do, and it's okay to say that. The monetary issue is very different from the DEI and transgender issues. You can disagree with other things that are happening, but even if you are gay or transsexual, do you really think that we should be spending money across the world promoting gay and transsexual acceptance? Or should we be doing it ourselves through the integrity of our actions? Screaming wildly and exposing yourself to children does nothing positive for the LGBT or trans community. It only convinces the world that you aren't mentally stable. I mean this from the bottom of my heart. What people do in their bedroom is nobody's business, but don't shove it in our children's faces. What kind of being wants to take away the innocence of a child? So that's my 2 cents. I, for one, am very grateful that Musk is overseeing the Department of Government Efficiency. I'm not apoplectic because he might steal Americans' money or identities. We all know the government has been doing that for years, and now, thanks to DOGE, the whole world knows and hopefully will follow suit and demand audits of their government spending because I promise you, it's not just happening in the United States. I'm going to leave you with a quote from Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. It's a quote that has clearly been missed by the many people who are fighting this government audit by DOGE. Nothing in the world is more dangerous than sincere ignorance and conscientious stupidity. So let's work through our differences. Let's create change and acceptance through meaningful communication, not hate and anger. Nobody can ever find joy when filled with anger. Till next time, love each other.